Peace be up on you. My name's Johann Trillion, and this is Far As I Can Tell, episode 26, The Master in Rome. All right, last episode, The Master Tours the World. We learned that around the age of 28, the Master, Jesus, befriended two Indians, a father and his son, Gonad and Ganit. His father was a wealthy businessman from India, and his son was 17 years of age. They needed an interpreter. They met Jesus in Jerusalem, struck up a conversation, whatnot, and he eventually agreed to go on this tour of the Roman world. They stopped off in places like Joppa, Alexandria in Egypt, Carthage, Crete, Italy. This was a major voyage, and also we learned a lot about him, just his personal ministry that he administered to so many people, important people, in the sense that the seeds he planted there sprouted when his public ministry blew up. So just a real interesting moment in time in his life, and a very important one, and a very little known fact of the matter. But here we are. They arrived in Rome. This is the city, the capital of this empire. It's a big deal. So all this is going to come from paper 132, the Sojourn at Rome. Since Gonad carried greetings from the princes of India to Tiberius, the Roman ruler, on the third day after their arrival in Rome, the two Indians and Jesus appeared before him. This is them in front of the emperor of Rome, Tiberius. This how we kicking it off. The morose emperor was unusually cheerful on this day and chatted long with the trio. And when they had gone from his presence, the emperor, referring to Jesus, remarked to the aide standing on his right, "If I had that fellow's kingly bearing and gracious manner, I would be a real emperor, huh?" Hey, that's what they say. The emperor of Rome said, after being in the presence of, unbeknownst to him, Jesus. Michael, the creator of our local universe. This was God in the flesh. While at Rome, Ganit had regular hours for study and for visiting places of interest about the city. His father had much business to transact, and desiring that his son grow up to become a worthy successor in the management of his vast commercial interest, he thought the time had come to introduce the boy to the business world. There were many citizens of India in Rome, and often one of Gonad's own employees would accompany him as interpreter so that Jesus would have whole days to himself. This gave him time in which to become thoroughly acquainted with this city of 2 million inhabitants. He was frequently to be found in the Forum, the center of political, legal, and business life. He often went up to the Capitolium and pondered the bondage of ignorance in which these Romans were held as he beheld this magnificent temple dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. He also spent much time on Palatine Hill, where were located the emperor's residence, the Temple of Apollo, and the Greek and Latin libraries. At this time, the Roman Empire included all of Southern Europe, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and Northwest Africa, and its inhabitants embraced the citizens of every country of the Eastern Hemisphere. His desire to study and mingle with this cosmopolitan aggregation of Urantia mortals was the chief reason why Jesus consented to make this journey. Jesus learned much about men while in Rome, But the most valuable of all the manifold experiences of his 6 months sojourn in their city was his contact with and influence upon the religious leaders of the empire's capital. Before the end of the first week in Rome, Jesus had sought out and had made the acquaintance of the worthwhile leaders of the Cynics, the Stoics, and the mystery cults, in particular the Mithraic group. Whether or not it was apparent to Jesus that the Jews were going to reject his mission, he most certainly foresaw that his messengers were presently coming to Rome to proclaim the kingdom of heaven, and he therefore set about in the most amazing manner to prepare the way for the better and more certain reception of their message. He selected 5 of the leading Stoics, 11 of the Cynics, and 16 of the mystery cult leaders, and spent much of his spare time for almost 6 months in intimate association with these religious teachers. And this was his method of instruction. Never once did he attack their errors or even mention the flaws in their teachings. In each case, he would select the truth in what they taught and then proceed so to embellish and illuminate this truth in their minds that in a very short time, this enhancement of the truth effectively crowded out the associated error. And thus were these Jesus taught men and women prepared for the subsequent recognition of additional and similar truths in the teachings of the early Christian missionaries. It was this early acceptance of the teachings of the gospel preachers which gave that powerful impetus to the rapid spread of Christianity in Rome and from there throughout the empire. The significance of this remarkable doing can the better be understood when we record the fact out of this group of 32 Jesus taught religious leaders in Rome, only 2 were unfruitful. The 30 became pivotal individuals in the establishment of Christianity in Rome, and certain of them also aided in turning the chief Mithraic temple into the first Christian church of that city. We, who view human activities from behind the scenes and in the light of 19 centuries of time, recognize 20 centuries now, because remember these papers came about in 1934. Let me say that again. This is some of the people, the celestial entities who put these papers together. This is them talking. We who view human activities from behind the scenes and in the light of 19 centuries of time recognize just 3 factors of paramount value in the early setting of the stage for the rapid spread of Christianity throughout Europe. And they are. So they're telling you this is why this religion blew up. 1, the choosing and holding of Simon Peter as an apostle. The choosing and holding of Simon Peter as an apostle. And they're saying this is why this blew up in Europe in particular, because, again, he's in the West. He's in Rome, really. 2, the talk in Jerusalem with Stephen, whose death led to the winning of Saul of Tarsus. Now, this is interesting. They are naming 3 events from them, from the inside looking out, so to say. These celestial beings who viewed all this are saying the reason this blew up is because, 1, picking Simon Peter as an apostle and what he did. 2, the talk that Jesus had with this dude, Stephen, almost, I don't know, when he was like 24, he had visited Jerusalem and had this long discussion with this dude, Stephen, who I think was a Greek at the time. And so this talk with Stephen that he had in Jerusalem, whose death led to the winning of Saul of Tarsus. That's Paul. Before he changed his name, he was known as Saul. And he witnessed the death of Stephen getting stoned to death and was like, damn, this man willing to die over whatever it is he's talking about. And this dude that he witnessed get stoned to death was Stephen that Jesus had talked to on a trip to Jerusalem years ago. It's heavy. 3. The preliminary preparation of these 30 Romans for the subsequent leadership of the new religion in Rome and throughout the empire. They're talking about his contact with these people he's personally encountered on his trip to Rome. These religious leaders he done kind of pulled to the side in order to subtly teach them. Through all their experiences, neither Stephen nor the 30 chosen ones ever realized that they had once talked with the man whose name became the subject of their religious teaching. Jesus' work in behalf of the original 32 was entirely personal. In his labors for these individuals, the scribe of Damascus, that's how he was known to a lot of people from a previous time he had spent in Damascus as like a scribe and a translator. And so a lot of people knew him. Among other names, people referred to him as the scribe from Damascus. So let me say all this again. Throughout their experiences, neither Stephen nor the 30 chosen ones ever realized that they had once talked with the man whose name became the subject of their religious teaching. Jesus' work in behalf of the original 32 was entirely personal. In his labors for these individuals, the scribe of Damascus never met more than 3 of them at one time, seldom more than 2, while most often he taught them singly. And he could do this great work of religious training because these men and women were not tradition bound. They were not victims of a settled preconception as to all future religious developments. Whoa, bro. That's man, it's getting blinding. It's starting to get blinding. He could do this great work of religious training because these men and women were not tradition bound. They were not victims of a settled preconception as to all future religious developments. Many were the times in the years so soon to follow that Peter, Paul, and the other Christian teachers in Rome heard about this scribe of Damascus who had preceded them and who had so obviously, and as they supposed unwittingly, prepared the way for their coming with the new gospel. Though Paul never really surmised the identity of this scribe of Damascus, he did in a short time before his death because of the similarity of personal descriptions, reached the conclusion that the, quote, tent maker of Antioch was also the scribe of Damascus. On one occasion, while preaching in Rome, Simon Peter, on listening to a description of the Damascus scribe, surmised that this individual might have been Jesus, but quickly dismissed the idea, knowing full well, so he thought, they have in parentheses, that the master had never been to Rome. So Jesus never told nobody about this trip. You got to understand, Zebedee, the dude he worked with, his father's old homeboy that he posted up with and got sons, James, John. He worked with them as a boat maker for about a year. Zebedee was the only one that knew Jesus was on this trip. And he told nobody because he confided in him not to tell nobody. And the master had this way about him where he didn't want to build up too much of like a personal reputation. Like he didn't want you to just focus on, even though he was so extraordinary with how he lived and the game he had and all the things he knew how to do. Like he was a skillful dude on top of everything. So he wasn't trying to build up this whole legend about him. He always tried to downplay his personal accomplishments and achievements in a sense. So damn. So all that to say, Simon Peter never even knew that Jesus had been to Rome. Nobody did. Part 1, true values. It was with Agamemnon, the leader of the Stoics, that Jesus had an all-night talk early during his sojourn in Rome. This man subsequently became a great friend of Paul and proved to be one of the strong supporters of the Christian church at Rome. In substance and restated in modern phraseology, Jesus taught Agamemnon. I'm gonna say a few things out of this. This is true values. They have this listed as this is what he's teaching on. The standard of true values must be looked for in the spiritual world and on divine levels of eternal reality. To an ascending mortal, as us, all lower and material standards must be recognized as transient, partial, and inferior. Basically, you got to understand that the real things, the only things of value are ultimately spiritual in nature and they're eternal. So if you're focusing on anything that's just material, he calling it transient, partial, and inferior. And it's temporary. Unless the moral insight and the spiritual attainment of mankind are proportionately augmented, the unlimited advancement of a purely materialistic culture may eventually become a menace to civilization. It's heavy. A purely materialistic science harbors within itself the potential seed of the destruction of all scientific striving, for this very attitude presages the ultimate collapse of a civilization which has abandoned its sense of moral values and has repudiated its spiritual goal of attainment. Basically, a society that's just based on pure material. And even when your scientists are just leading you in a purely material fashion, in a sense, and ignoring any type of moral values, you're headed to destruction. I'm gonna skip down. This is part 2. It says good and evil. Marcus was the acknowledged leader of the Cynics of Rome, and he became a great friend of the scribe of Damascus. Day after day, he conversed with Jesus, and night upon night, he listened to his supernal teaching. Among the more important discussions with Marcus was the one designed to answer this sincere cynic's question about good and evil. In substance and in 20th century phraseology, Jesus said, "My brother, good and evil are merely words symbolizing relative levels of human comprehension of the observable universe. If you are ethically lazy and socially indifferent, you can take as your standard of good the current social usages. If you are spiritually indolent and morally unprogressive, you may take as your standards of good the religious practices and traditions of your contemporaries. But the soul that survives time and emerges into eternity must make a living and personal choice between good and evil as they are determined by the true values of the spiritual standards established by the divine spirit which the Father in heaven has sent to indwell within the heart of man. This indwelling spirit is the standard of personality survival. Goodness, like truth, is always relative and unfailingly evil contrasted. It is the perception of these qualities of goodness and truth that enables the evolving souls of men to make those personal decisions of choice which are essential to eternal survival. The spiritually blind individual who logically follows scientific dictation, social usage, and religious dogma stands in grave danger of sacrificing his moral freedom and losing his spiritual liberty. Such a soul is destined to become an intellectual parrot, a social automaton, and a slave to religious authority. Goodness, like truth, is always relative and unfailingly evil contrasted. It is the perception of these qualities of goodness and truth that enables the evolving souls of men to make those personal decisions of choice which are essential to eternal survival. The spiritually blind individual who logically follows scientific dictation, social usage, and religious dogmas stands in grave danger of sacrificing his moral freedom and losing his spiritual liberty. Such a soul is destined to become an intellectual parrot, a social automaton, and a slave to religious authority. Goodness is always growing toward new levels of the increasing liberty of moral self-realization and spiritual personality attainment, the discovery of and identification with the indwelling adjuster. The adjuster, we talked about it before. If you ain't hip, this is the spirit of the creator of all that indwells us all. It is a fragment of all that God is, that he broke off a piece in everybody. The thought adjuster. An experience is good when it heightens the appreciation of beauty, augments the moral will, enhances the discernment of truth, enlarges the capacity to love and serve one's fellows, exalts the spiritual ideals, and unifies the supreme human motives of time with the eternal plans of the indwelling adjuster, all of which lead directly to an increased desire to do the Father's will, thereby fostering the divine passion to find God and to be more like him. As you ascend the universe scale of creature development, you will find increasing goodness and diminishing evil in perfect accordance with your capacity for goodness experience and truth discernment. The ability to entertain error or experience evil will not be fully lost until the ascending human soul achieves final spirit levels. It's a little bit more, but I'm going to skip on over to part 3. And this is another conference he has with another individual, and they're speaking on part 3, truth and faith. Naban was a Greek Jew and foremost among the leaders of the chief mystery cult in Rome, the Mithraic. Now, mystery cults, they aren't like a religion per se, kind of like those. This is what secret societies emerged out of, essentially. These sort of cults based on some sort of esoteric knowledge or myth that they pretty much kind of hoard to themselves, and the only people able to obtain it are initiates in this particular cult. You feel me? So it's not open to all. And Mithraism was one that started in Persia way back when. But so he's speaking to a priest of a Mithraic cult. While this high priest of Mithraism held many conferences with the Damascus scribe, he was most permanently influenced by their discussion of truth and faith one evening. Naban had thought to make a convert of Jesus and had even suggested that he return to Palestine as a Mithraic teacher. He little realized that Jesus was preparing him to become one of the early converts of the gospel of the kingdom. Restated in modern phraseology, the substance of Jesus' teachings was: truth cannot be defined with words, only by living. Truth is always more than knowledge. Knowledge pertains to things observed, but truth transcends such purely material levels in that it consorts with wisdom and embraces such imponderables as human experience, even spiritual and living realities. Knowledge originates in science, wisdom in true philosophy, truth in the religious experience of spiritual living. Knowledge deals with facts, wisdom with relationships, truth with reality values. Man tends to crystallize science, formulate philosophy, and dogmatize truth because he is mentally lazy in adjusting to the progressive struggles of living, while he is also terribly afraid of the unknown. Natural man is slow to initiate changes in his habits of thinking and in his techniques of living. That's true. Revealed truth, personally discovered truth, is the supreme delight of the human soul. It is the joint creation of the material mind and the indwelling spirit. The eternal salvation of this truth, discerning, and beauty loving soul is assured by that hunger and thirst for goodness, which leads this mortal to develop a singleness of purpose to do the Father's will, to find God and to become like Him. There is never conflict between true knowledge and truth. There may be conflict between knowledge and human beliefs, beliefs colored with prejudice, distorted by fear, and dominated by the dread of facing new facts of material discovery or spiritual progress. But truth can never become man's possession without the exercise of faith. This is true because man's thoughts, wisdom, ethics, and ideals will never rise higher than his faith, his sublime hope. And all such true faith is predicated on profound reflection, sincere self-criticism, and uncompromising moral consciousness. Faith is the inspiration of the spiritized creative imagination. I'm going to skip a little bit because he has a lot more that he's talking over this dude with Naban. Let me see. Yeah, I'm just going to skip down. Naban was greatly impressed by these words, as he was by each of his talks with Jesus. These truths continued to burn within his heart, and he was of great assistance to the later arriving preachers of Jesus' gospel. Part 4, personal ministry. Jesus did not devote all his leisure while in Rome to this work of preparing men and women to become future disciples in the oncoming kingdom. He spent much time gaining an intimate knowledge of all races and classes of men who lived in this, the largest and most cosmopolitan city of the world. In each of these numerous human contacts, Jesus had a double purpose. He desired to learn their reactions to the life they were living in the flesh, and he was also minded to say or do something to make that life richer and more worthwhile. His religious teachings during these weeks were no different than those which characterized his later life as teacher of the 12 and preacher to the multitudes. Pardon me. Always the burden of his message was the fact of the Heavenly Father's love and the truth of his mercy, coupled with the good news that man is a faith son of this same God of love. That was it. That was the little, that was his tagline, his message. That was what he was put here for. That was it. The fact of the Heavenly Father's love and the truth of his mercy, coupled with the good news that man is a faith son of this same God of love. And sister, man includes woman. This is mankind, okay? Man, woman, children, all live up under this. Jesus' usual technique of social contact was to draw people out and into talking with him by asking them questions. The interview would usually begin by his asking them questions and end by their asking him questions. He was equally adept in teaching by either asking or answering questions. As a rule, to those he taught the most, he said the least. Those who derived most benefit from his personal ministry were overburdened, anxious, and dejected mortals who gained much relief because of the opportunity to unburden their souls to a sympathetic and understanding listener. And he was all that and more. And when these maladjusted human beings had told Jesus about their troubles, always was he able to offer practical and immediately helpful suggestions, looking toward the correction of their real difficulties, albeit he did not neglect to speak words of present comfort and immediate consolation. And invariably will he tell these distressed mortals about the love of God and impart the information by various and sundry methods that they were the children of this loving Father in heaven. In this manner, during the sojourn in Rome, Jesus personally came into affectionate and uplifting contact with upward of 500 mortals of the realm. He thus gained a knowledge of the different races of mankind, which he could never have acquired in Jerusalem and hardly even in Alexandria. He always regarded this 6 months as one of the richest and most informative of any like period of his earth life. As might have been expected, such a versatile and aggressive man could not thus function for 6 months in the world's metropolis without being approached by numerous persons who desired to secure his services in connection with some business or, more often, for some project of teaching, social reform, or religious movement. More than a dozen such proffers were made, and he utilized each one as an opportunity for imparting some thought of spiritual ennoblement by well-chosen words or by some obliging service. Jesus was very fond of doing things, even little things, for all sorts of people. He taught with a Roman senator on politics and statesmanship, and this one contact with Jesus made such an impression on this legislator that he spent the rest of his life vainly trying to induce his colleagues to change the course of the ruling policy from the idea of the government supporting and feeding the people to that of the people supporting the government. Jesus spent one evening with a wealthy slaveholder, talked about man as the Son of God, and the next day this man, Claudius, gave freedom to 117 slaves. He visited at dinner with a Greek physician, telling him that his patients had minds and souls as well as bodies, and thus led this able doctor to attempt a far more reaching ministry to his fellow man. He taught with all sorts of people in every walk of life. The only place in Rome he did not visit was the public baths. He refused to accompany his friends to the baths because of the sex promiscuity which there prevailed. Yeah. To a Roman soldier, as they walked along the Tiber, he said, "Be brave of heart as well as of hand. Dare to do justice and be big enough to show mercy. Compel your lower nature to obey your higher nature as you obey your superiors. Revere goodness and exalt truth. Choose the beautiful in place of the ugly. Love your fellows and reach out for God with a whole heart, for God is your Father in heaven." To the speaker at the forum, he said, "Your eloquence is pleasing, your logic is admirable, your voice is pleasant, but your teaching is hardly true. If you could only enjoy the inspiring satisfaction of knowing God as your spiritual father, then you might employ the powers of speech to liberate your fellows from the bondage of darkness and from the slavery of ignorance." This was the Marcus who heard Peter preach in Rome and became his successor. When they crucified Simon Peter, it was this man who defied the Roman persecutors and boldly continued to preach the new gospel. Meeting a poor man who had been falsely accused, Jesus went with him before the magistrate, and having been granted special permission to appear in his behalf, made that superb address, in the course of which he said, "Justice makes a nation great, and the greater a nation, the more solicitous will it be to see that injustice shall not befall even its most humble citizen. Woe upon any nation when only those who possess money and influence can secure ready justice before its courts. It is the sacred duty of a magistrate to acquit the innocent as well as to punish the guilty. Upon the impartiality, fairness, and integrity of his courts, the endurance of a nation depends. Civil government is founded on justice, even as true religion is founded on mercy." The judge reopened the case, and when the evidence had been sifted, he discharged the prisoner. Of all Jesus's activities during these days of personal ministry, this came the nearest to being a public appearance. Part 5. Counseling the Rich. A certain rich man, a Roman citizen, and a Stoic became greatly interested in Jesus' teaching, having been introduced by Agamemnon. That's that guy he talked to earlier. After many intimate conferences, this wealthy citizen asked Jesus what he would do with wealth if he had it. And Jesus answered him, "I will bestow material wealth for the enhancement of material life, even as I would minister knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual service for the enrichment of the intellectual life, the ennoblement of the social life, and the advancement of the spiritual life. I would administer material wealth as a wise and effective trustee of the resources of one generation for the benefit and ennoblement of the next and succeeding generations." But the rich man was not fully satisfied with Jesus' answer. He made bold to ask again, "But what do you think a man in my position should do with his wealth? Should I keep it or should I give it away?" And when Jesus perceived that he really desired to know more of the truth about his loyalty to God and his duty to men, he further answered, "My good friend, I discern that you are a sincere seeker after wisdom and an honest lover of truth. Therefore, am I minded to lay before you my view of the solution of your problems having to do with the responsibilities of wealth. I do this because you have asked for my counsel. And in giving you this advice, I am not concerned with the wealth of any other rich man. I am offering advice only to you and your personal guidance. If you honestly desire to regard your wealth as a trust, if you really wish to become a wise and efficient steward of your accumulated wealth, then would I counsel you to make the following analysis of the sources of your riches. Ask yourself and do your best to find an honest answer. Whence came this wealth? And as a help in the study of the sources of your great fortune, I suggest that you bear in mind the following 10 different methods of amassing material wealth. And I'm just going to read through them real quick. He offers a little, they expound on it briefly, but let me see. 1, inherited wealth. 2, discovered wealth, riches derived from the uncultivated resources of Mother Earth. 3, trade wealth, riches obtained as a fair profit in the exchange and barter of material goods. 4, unfair wealth, riches derived from the unfair exploitation or the enslavement of one's fellows. 5, interest wealth, income derived from the fair and just earning possibilities of invested capital. 6, genius wealth, riches accruing from the rewards of the creative and inventive endowments of the human mind. 7, accidental wealth, riches derived from the generosity of one's fellows or taking origin in the circumstances of life. 8, stolen wealth, riches secured by unfairness, dishonesty, theft, or fraud. 9, trust funds, wealth lodged in your hands by your fellows for some specific use, now or in the future. 10. Earned wealth. Riches derived directly from your own personal labor, the fair and just reward of your own daily efforts of mind and body. And so, my friend, if you would be a faithful and just steward of your large fortune before God and in service to men, you must approximately divide your wealth into these 10 grand divisions and then proceed to administer each portion in accordance with the wise and honest interpretation of the laws of justice, equity, fairness, and true efficiency. Albeit the God of heaven would not condemn you if sometimes you erred in doubtful situations on the side of merciful and unselfish regard for the distress of the suffering victims of the unfortunate circumstances of mortal life. When in honest doubt about the equity and justice of material situations, let your decisions favor those who are in need. Favor those who suffer the misfortune of undeserved hardships. And he goes on to have they expound on these 10 sources of wealth and what he should do in each scenario if this is where his wealth derived from. But it's a lot, and I'm not going to read it. So I'm going to skip down. When Jesus had finished counseling him, this wealthy Roman arose from his couch and, in saying farewell for the night, delivered himself of this promise. My good friend, I perceive you are a man of great wisdom and goodness, and tomorrow I will begin the administration of all my wealth in accordance with your counsel. So he had a profound impact on that man's decisions of what to do with his material wealth, which, as we'll see, is a stumbling block for a lot of people. And it's just interesting, man. But we'll see. Part 6, social ministry. Here in Rome also occurred that touching incident in which the creator of a universe spent several hours restoring a lost child to his anxious mother. This little boy had wandered away from his home, and Jesus found him crying in distress. He and Gannett were on their way to the libraries, but they devoted themselves to getting the child back home. Gannett never forgot Jesus' comment. You know, Gannett, most human beings are like this lost child. They spend much of their time crying in fear and suffering in sorrow when, in very truth, they are but a short distance from safety and security, even as this child was only a little way from home. And all those who know the way of truth and enjoy the assurance of knowing God should esteem it a privilege, not a duty, to offer guidance to their fellows in their efforts to find the satisfactions of living. Did we not supremely enjoy this ministry of restoring the child to his mother? So do those who lead men to God experience the supreme satisfaction of human service. And from that day forward, for the remainder of his natural life, Gannett was continually on the lookout for lost children whom he might restore to their homes. There was the widow with 5 children whose husband had been accidentally killed. Jesus told Gannett about the loss of his own father by an accident, and they went repeatedly to comfort this mother and her children, while Gannett sought money from his father to provide food and clothing. They did not cease their efforts until they had found a position for the eldest boy so that he could help in the care of the family. That night, as Gonad listened to the recital of these experiences, he said to Jesus good-naturedly, I propose to make a scholar or a businessman of my son, and now you start out to make a philosopher or a philanthropist of him. And Jesus, smiling, replied, perhaps we will make him all 4. Then can he enjoy a 4-fold satisfaction in life, as his ear for the recognition of human melody will be able to recognize 4 tones instead of 1. Then said Gonad, I perceive that you really are a philosopher. You must write a book for future generations. And Jesus replied, not a book. My mission is to live a life in this generation and for all generations. But he stopped, saying to Gannett, My son, it's time to retire. It's the last part 7. Wind this up. I ain't gonna hold you. 7 trips about Rome. Jesus, Gonai, and Gannet made 5 trips away from Rome to points of interest in the surrounding territory. On their visit to the northern Italian lakes, Jesus had a long talk with Gannet concerning the impossibility of teaching a man about God if the man does not desire to know God. They had casually met a thoughtless pagan while on their journey up to the lakes, and Gannet was surprised that Jesus did not follow out his usual practice of enlisting the man in conversation, which would naturally lead up to the discussion of spiritual questions. When Gannet asked his teacher why he evinced so little interest in this pagan, Jesus answered, Gannet, the man was not hungry for truth. He was not dissatisfied with himself. He was not ready to ask for help, and the eyes of his mind were not open to receive light for the soul. That man was not ripe for the harvest of salvation. He must be allowed more time for the trials and difficulties of life to prepare him for the reception of wisdom and higher learning. Or if we could have him live with us, we might by our lives show him the Father in heaven, and thus would he become so attracted by our lives as sons of God that he would be constrained to inquire about our Father. You cannot reveal God to those who do not seek for him. You cannot lead unwilling souls into the joys of salvation. Man must become hungry for truth as a result of the experiences of living, or he must desire to know God as the result of contact with the lives of those who are acquainted with the Divine Father before another human being can act as the means of leading such a fellow mortal to the Father in heaven. If we know God, our real business on earth is so to live as to permit the Father to reveal himself in our lives, and thus will all God-seeking persons see the Father and ask for our help in finding out more about the God who in this manner finds expression in our lives. It's hard. Let your light so shine before man that they are led to glorify your Father in heaven. Like, you shine so hard, people like, man, how you do this? And you tell them. You show them. That's what it's about. It was on the visit to Switzerland, up in the mountains, that Jesus had an all-day talk with both father and son about Buddhism. Many times Gannet had asked Jesus direct questions about Buddha, but he had always received more or less evasive replies. Now, in the presence of the son, the father asked Jesus a direct question about Buddha, and he received a direct reply. Said, Gonad, I would really like to know what you think of Buddha. And Jesus answered, your Buddha was much better than your Buddhism. Buddha was a great man, even a prophet to his people, but he was an orphan prophet. By that I mean that he early lost sight of his spiritual father, the Father in heaven. His experience was tragic. He tried to live and teach as a messenger of God, but without God. Buddha guided his ship of salvation right up to the safe harbor, right up to the entrance to the haven of mortal salvation. And there, because of faulty charts of navigation, the good ship ran aground. There has rested these many generations, motionless and almost hopelessly stranded. And thereon have many of your people remained all these years. They live within hailing distance of the safe waters of rest, but they refuse to enter because the noble craft of the good Buddha met the misfortune of grounding just outside the harbor. And the Buddhist peoples never will enter this harbor unless they abandon the philosophic craft of their prophet and seize upon his noble spirit. Had your people remained true to the spirit of Buddha, you would have long since entered your haven of spirit tranquility, soul rest, and assurance of salvation. You see, Gonad, Buddha knew God in spirit, but failed clearly to discover him in mind. The Jews discovered God in mind, but largely failed to know him in spirit. Today, the Buddhists flounder about in a philosophy without God, while my people are piteously enslaved to the fear of a God without a saving philosophy of life and liberty. You have a philosophy without a God. The Jews have a God, but are largely without a philosophy of living as related thereto. Buddha, failing to envision God as a spirit and as a father, failed to provide in his teaching the moral energy and the spiritual driving power which a religion must possess if it is to change a race and exalt a nation. Then exclaimed Gannet, "Teacher, let's you and I make a new religion, one good enough for India and big enough for Rome, and maybe we can trade it to the Jews for Yahweh." And Jesus replied, "Gannet, religions are not made. The religions of men grow up over long periods of time, while the revelations of God flash upon earth in the lives of the men who reveal God to their fellows." But they did not comprehend the meaning of these prophetic words. That night, after they had retired, Gannet could not sleep. He talked a long time with his father and finally said, "You know, Father, I sometimes think Joshua is a prophet." And his father only sleepily replied, "My son, there are others." From this day, for the remainder of his natural life, Gannet continued to evolve a religion of his own. He was mightily moved in his own mind by Jesus' broad-mindedness, fairness, and tolerance. In all their discussions of philosophy and religion, this youth never experienced feelings of resentment or reactions of antagonism. What a scene for the celestial intelligences to behold. This spectacle of the Indian lad proposing to the creator of a universe that they make a new religion. And though the young man did not know it, they were making a new and everlasting religion right then and there. This new way of salvation, the revelation of God to man through and in Jesus. That which the lad wanted most to do, he was unconsciously actually doing. And it was and is ever thus. That which the enlightened and reflective human imagination of spiritual teaching and leading wholeheartedly and unselfishly wants to do and be, becomes measurably creative in accordance with the degree of mortal dedication to the divine doing of the Father's will. In short, when man goes in partnership with God, great things may and do happen. Yo, I ain't gonna hold you. That was paper 132. The Sojourn at Rome. The master in Rome. Peace be up on you.